Good evening, everybody. We are here at our third Thursday Forum. It's our first one of the year, and so glad you could join us, those who are online and here in person. And our topic tonight is a very timely one, and we're going to talk about banned books. This is co-sponsored by the ACLU of Wisconsin Chippewa Valley chapter, and Banned Books Week is actually next week, but we're going to herald it ahead of time because there's so many events that happen in the libraries and local area that we wanted to beat them to it. So, yeah. So we're going to have each panelist introduce themselves. And, Banned Books Week is an annual event celebrating the freedom to read. It spotlights current and historical attempts to censor books in libraries and schools. It brings together the entire book community, librarians, booksellers, journalists, and teachers, and students, and readers of all types. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. If you guys want to turn on your mic, and you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Margaret Leonard. I am an owner and bookseller at Daughters Books here in Eau Claire.
Hi, I'm Basu. I'm a professor of English at University of Wisconsin Stout. And thank you, Julie, for inviting all of us today.
I am Lindsey Brandrup. I teach English at Chippewa Falls High School. This was my 16th year teaching. And I also serve as a secretary on the ACLU of Wisconsin Chippewa Valley chapter board.
Hello, I am Ehren Lepp. I am a junior from North High School, an avid reader, and one of the student representatives for the ACLU.
Oh, I should add, I forgot to mention that I'm also a board member of the ACLU of Chippewa Valley.
I'm going to start us off with our first question, and the question is, why do you think that banned books continue to be a problem? And what do you have ideas or strategies to protect the freedom to read? And so maybe we can start with you.
Well, I think that banned books continue to be a problem because of fear, ultimately. And I think it's something that we all fear. There are lots of things to fear all the time these days, and not just these days. I think people can be afraid of truth and afraid of history and afraid of difference, and I think it's something that we all can feel. I don't think it has anything to do with your political affiliation or anything. There are things to be afraid of, and sometimes those things are found in books. And one of the things I was thinking of as a potential strategy to combat some of that is really just talking about books with each other. I think so often this conversation centers around students and young people, and I feel like if parents or caregivers of any kind really were ready and willing to just read the books that their kids are reading and talk to them about them, we could have a larger conversation. So parents or caregivers working with their teachers or other people in their lives that are assigning these things. I just think that if we can talk through things, we can talk about our fears, which we all have, and that could potentially bring us all closer together instead of further apart.
So the reason I volunteered to be on the panel was because on August 12th, Salman Rushdie was attacked and stabbed. And I have spent most of my life following Salman Rushdie's career and reading his books. And in 1989, when the Satanic Verses first came out, it was banned. For the first country to ban it was India. And I got hold of it. It somehow slipped through customs, and a Canadian pen friend had sent it to me, and I kept it and read it. I didn't understand it at that time, but much later, in graduate school, I went on to write part of my dissertation on Rushdie. And there was, at that time, of course, we knew that his Japanese translator, his Italian translator had been, one of them had been killed and another had been stabbed and wounded. But I did not expect that this would come back in 2023 on August 12th, as India was getting ready to celebrate its 75th Independence Day, that this would happen. So it just tells you that, book banning is pervasive. It's not something which is limited only to the banning or the destruction or the burning of the book. It extends to the safety of authors who are really putting their lives on the line in order to defend their artistic freedom. So it's very, very important at this particular time to talk about that. And as we go on, I think what I wanted to touch on mostly is that when we talk about the Rushdie affair, it's very easy to kind of create a binary between the progressive West and the backward authoritarian Middle East with the lens of Islamophobia. And that's something that I want to read against. I'll stop here. I don't want to go on.
So I think I spent actually more time than I had anticipated really thinking of a response. Yes, I sure can. Thank you. So I spent quite some time thinking about this, more than I had anticipated. And I agree that it is rooted in fear. And I surprised myself by taking a somewhat uncharacteristic, optimistic view of these issues, because I think that if we have books and the freedom to write books that cause fear or discomfort in people, that could be viewed as a good thing in a way, that we are able to push the boundaries, that we are trying to normalize and give voice to marginalized or minoritized groups. And I think that with that, kind of becomes, the fear becomes more tangible. And I think that fear is rooted, and that like censorship and banning becomes a form of control. Because I think sometimes when we fear, our tendency is to want to then try to control what we can. And as I was thinking more about, just that idea of, well, what really are we afraid of? I do think that there's this irrational fear that as other people gain rights, those who have long held these rights are going to lose out, or that minoritized groups are going to, come back for some sort of, vengeance. And at least that's the perspective that I've been seeing or hearing about as it pertains to schools. And so in some sense, I mean, it's a little naive, I suppose, but in some sense, I think the fact that there is kind of this new flare up of book banning just shows that we're kind of pushing, we're pushing back and making progress in terms of what's normalized. And that gives me a little bit of hope, because I think back to the, books that I was interested in reading and how those ideas furthered my thinking, and I know the kids I work with all the time would read these books, and a lot of kids have read the books and enjoy them. So I think that is one of the reasons why the problem, we're seeing it flare up. Of course, there's the orchestration too, politically, but I think that they're tapping into that fear. And in terms of solutions, well, I guess I'm thinking about it maybe more strategically, or not more strategically, but just in terms of my position. And I do think it comes down to having to understand the systems in place, whether that's policies or just the actors in an institution. For example, in a school, so much of whether a book is going to get banned or not has to do with who works there and what the policies are that allow us to either, go through a process or just to have somebody pull the book off the shelf. And so in addition to talking with people and educating them, I think one of the pieces that they have to be educated about is just what are the access points in those systems that people can advocate for. So, obviously electing school board representatives in this specific situation that are sympathetic to or care about the freedom of speech, but also understanding within the school district who is in charge of those policies. Because my current understanding is that if somebody were to be let go and somebody else were to step in, if we don't have a policy in place, then how it plays out could be very different. So I can circle back to that too. But.
Why I believe a lot of books are banned is sort of going back to the point of fear, silencing, and censorship. A lot of, at least when it comes to books who speak to the experiences of marginalized groups by the people who are living through it. It is a powerful tool to silence those voices and limit education, which allows certain narratives to be used within a political context. But it also comes from a place of fear of the unknown and also other emotions around that. For how we would approach solving it, I personally am someone who's very strong in believing voting and unionizing is how we change policies. But for outside of America, I don't know.
Julie, can I just add something which, hearing all of the panelists, it came to me. The question you had asked us about why are books banned, I think they're often banned because they are not read. I was debating between wearing the Read t-shirt or but I finally chose the Handmaid's Tale t-shirt. But the Read t-shirt might have been more appropriate. I mean, again, going back to Satanic Verses, I will sound like a broken record by the end of this evening. It was banned without having been read. And people boasted. I mean, the Indian politician who was instrumental in getting the government to ban it said, he wrote an open letter to Rushdie and said, Mr. Rushdie, I have no interest in reading your book, but it is obscene and it is, offensive to me as a Muslim. So, a lot of times I think the books are not read, and there is a circulating idea of the book that it contains something offensive, or maybe some cherry-picked passages are read, and that is enough to condemn it.
Okay, we're going to go to our next question, and this is kind of like when you're in school and you do a book report, but I thought it'd be fun to ask our presenters about what is your favorite banned book and why was it banned? And so I think we'll actually start on the other side and go in and do it that way.
Well, from my recent reading of banned books, which I took upon myself, probably the two favorite ones I have recently read would either be A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela or A Brave Face. I'm forgetting the author's name right now. A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela was talking about his experience of being both a peaceful and violent protester against the Nationalist Party regime within 1940s to early 1990s South Africa, and how he fought against apartheid. It was banned by a number of countries, both within South Africa and outside of it, including America during certain points of time, in large part because South Africa was a trade partner of many of these countries that supposedly held more liberal ideas. And they wanted to silence a lot of the stories of what was actually going on there so they could justify their economic wants over their moral requirements, or whatever you want to put it as. And A Brave Face is a story of basically someone who had lived through the 90s as a queer teen with depression, and just talks about some of that stuff. And it is one of the recent books that has been banned in a couple of U.S. school systems, and just in general, it's been banned due to having very detailed topics on what it was like, both mental health-wise and sexuality-wise. I still found a lot of worth from it, since it helped me understand what a number of my friends have gone through in a more direct context.
I decided to go as my favorite book with the first time that I learned, I guess, that reading could be an act of rebellion, which was after I had read at a younger age, Then Again, Maybe I Won't, by Judy Blume. And a few years, after reading that, learned that it had been a banned book. And while I was reading it, it was, Judy Blume, of course, writes with a frankness for children that is just, I just find so beautiful. I think a lot of times we disregard kids' ability to handle truth, and we underestimate, how they're experiencing the world. And that book, I just remember as I was reading it, feeling like, wow, this is real. This feels real. This doesn't feel like some kind of cheesy, made-up thing for kids. I was very mature. But it just was the first time that I really felt like the power, I guess, of a book, in learning that it had been banned. And more recently, The Hate You Give was just it just was such a well-written book. It was so amazing. It felt so authentic in terms of how teenagers talk and experience things. I remember recommending it, like, this is a book I can see adopting in a curriculum, because I always struggle with that. If we're gonna have kids read a book, what should the book be? But that one hit all of the important marks for me, and then I should have known, of course, that it would be, one of the most challenged books, recently. And again, I think it just speaks to your point that you were making, Lopa, about people not reading the book. They just think, oh, that's a Black Lives Matter anti-police book, when in reality it deals with so much more, and it really explained the issue thoughtfully. So those were just two that I had picked.
So, there's a number of banned books that I really like, and I will say that Mouse, which was kind of challenged last year, is one of my favorites. I've taught it, early in my teaching life in Stout, and I'm thinking of bringing it back. As soon as it was banned, I took out a copy and gave it to my son, who generally refuses to read anything I hand to him, but he did read it and say that it was good. So that's, it was such a surprise to see that it was banned, because it is, so rich in its representation of Holocaust history. But my personal favorite, as you already know, is the Satanic Verses, and that is because it is, such a deep exploration of the South Asian immigrant experience and the bicultural experience of growing up in Bombay for Rushdie, and then coming to England and absorbing all of the nuances of popular culture. The book is difficult to read initially, because it is, it's so many points of view, so many references to popular culture, some of which I can get immediately because I know the songs from Bollywood that he's talking about, but I didn't initially get, the references to Gunter Grass, or, there's high culture and popular culture all mixed up, and he's just having such a grand time kind of, playing with it. The reason why it was offensive is that it's a profound meditation on faith and doubt. It's the central character is having some dreams about early Islam, and all of the things that he writes about, the controversial things, are well known in the Islamic tradition. It's the whole debate about one verse or a set of verses in the Quran in which, temporarily the Prophet Muhammad had agreed to kind of include 3 goddesses, pre-Islamic goddesses of Mecca, into the pantheon, just to kind of make political peace. And later on, he said those verses were under the influence of Satan, and so they had to be removed. This is not something Rushdie made up. It exists in the Islamic tradition. But it was, something that irritated a lot of devout Muslims. And the reactions are not monolithic. There are lots of Muslims who loved, this questioning, this playful, exploration of Muslim identity in a cosmopolitan context. Some people, of course, some of them had not read the book, didn't want anything to do with it. So, and also I should mention there is sexualization of the Prophet's wives, and the fact that Muhammad, the Prophet, had 12 wives. That's that whole episode is satirized. That's also offensive. So there are different reactions to it, but the reaction cannot be that the person who wrote the book needs to be killed, or an edict needs to be issued, and and even if 25, 30 years pass, and even if he has offered a semi-apology, he still needs to be stabbed. That's just, not acceptable. I don't know what to do. I mean, those who have decided that they're not going to read it, they will never change their minds. It's just an impossible situation.
Well, I think it's sort of hard to choose a favorite banned book because so many of the best books are banned. But I landed on Beloved by Toni Morrison. The first time I read Beloved, I was a sophomore in college, and I just was not prepared for it. I think I met this book and just couldn't. I felt like I didn't get it. I felt like it was just so hard. But then I read it again in my master's program, and I think I was more prepared for it. And I think, again, this sort of echoes exactly what Lopa mentioned, right, is that you have to read the book, and sometimes you have to read the book at the right time in order for it to really mean the things that it can mean to you and to anyone else who's reading it. So I did a little looking and found that Beloved is banned because it depicts violence, and it depicts sex acts that, quote, provide no historical context, which I found interesting. And also that it was at a 5th grade reading level, which I think is probably pretty racist. So I don't know. I think it is violent, and there's violent sexuality in Beloved, but it's a story about slavery and the impacts of slavery and what really is more violent than slavery. And I think that if you're going to teach kids, or anyone really who's reading Beloved, if you're going to teach them that the Civil War was about states' rights, you need to also show them that the Civil War was about trying to end, or was about slavery, and this is the reality of slavery. So, that's my favorite banned book.
Now we're going to have a time where the speakers on our panel are welcome to share some thoughts if you haven't already, and we'll start with Lopa if you would like to, and then we can go as people want to go, and then we might have time for some questions.
I think I'll just use this question, or this open-ended question, to dive just a little deeper into why the Satanic Verses was banned at the time it was. And more than anything inherently offensive in it, it was a constellation of geopolitical factors that led to its banning. So what do I mean by that? I mean, in India, there was a government that was kind of shaky. That's the Congress government of Rajiv Gandhi. And it was trying to appease the Muslim minority and try to get its votes. And therefore, it was amenable to the hardline Islamic fundamentalists putting pressure on them to ban the book. It was also the time when the Supreme Court had granted or allowed Muslim women to get some kind of alimony or some kind of divorce and maintenance rights were being given by a more liberal Supreme Court in India. But the fundamentalists were against that, and they were putting pressure on the Congress government and the Congress government ultimately passed a Muslim Women's Divorce Act, which went against the Supreme Court's judgment for a specific case, the Shahbano case, and said that maintenance would not be given by the former husband, but it was the responsibility of the natal family. So the woman has to go back to her, brothers or father or whoever, and that's how it's going to be. So this was the background story, and that led to the banning of the book. So this is happening in India. In Iran, where the fatwa was issued by Ayatollah Khomeini, it was a way to to posturize in front of the West and to prevent the normalizing of relations. So it was kind of a sensational thing to put out the fatwa and to for Ayatollah Khomeini to gain some prominence. So it was more posturizing and presenting himself as strong and anti-Western. That was part of the impetus in the fatwa. The British Muslims, the Bradford community, they wanted the book banned, and they were doing it, by a very civil process. Actually, they found that the British laws had British law had blasphemy laws, which were often which had been applied for Christian examples of blasphemy, and they were using that civil process to say that this is blasphemy in Islamic tradition. So why don't you apply the same law for Muslims? But it didn't go very well for them. These, peaceful and civil litigation didn't go very far, and it ended up then by becoming a public burning of the books in Bradford, England. So there are all of these different, and the British Muslims were at this time feeling very marginalized, because it was the time of Margaret Thatcher, and and also people like Enoch Powell, very anti-immigration oriented. And it is really kind of sad that the book is so much about immigrant rights, and it was not read, and there was this anger, and it ended up being such a kind of a self-destructive thing. So what I'm trying to get at by just giving you a little background on these places is that very often the banning of a book is not about the book, it's about political factors that is responsible. I think that this has a direct kind of link to what's going on today, where the books that are banned, it's really about posturizing or other political factors in the background that are influencing these decisions.
I'll go just because I have a few things to build off of what you said. I 100% agree with what you were saying about the context, and I think what we're seeing in schools, like I said, I work in Chippewa, but I know also just from what I've read and from people I've talked to that similar things are happening in Eau Claire, that the books, many of the books that people are challenging are coming from a list that was sent out, basically, from, and again, I don't want to be partisan, but in this case, it was conservative action groups that sent out this list of 100 books that were bad for various reasons. And so some of the books people were challenging weren't even in the library or taught in the school. One of them was in the school library, but it hadn't, been checked out or anything. And so I think the idea here is just that it is it's a strategic move to motivate a base of people to get upset. I'm not going to say that school isn't a political place. I think it always has been and should be, not in a partisan sense, but in a sense of status quo versus change. Hopefully we're united in our desire to help people learn the skills to make the world a better place, I would hope. But so I think that it's a little bit sad. I mean, it's very frustrating, but sometimes you can feel sad too about the way that people their emotions are being manipulated about things and where they're seeing problems that aren't really there in the same way that they're seeing them. And so I do think that is one piece of it. I think the reason that works, and I don't know that I articulated it very well when I was speaking before, but I do think the reason that works is the fear of that if we have to accept all people, that means we don't have this power. And people aren't maybe naming it, but they feel that they're losing something by having to accept others. And so I sometimes wonder if we as people who value freedom of speech or freedom in general don't need to pivot and think about defining more what an equal society looks like, that it isn't about taking rights away. I don't know, and this is a very ill-formed thought, but it's just something that I've kind of been pondering a bit more, because I don't think that you can't use facts or you definitely can't use facts to talk people down from that position. And I think, recognizing their fear and, as you said, Margaret, at the beginning, that I can see that, in myself with my own children when they're, going on, if they want to play a game like Roblox, and you start to worry like, I don't really know enough about that. And what are you doing on that game? And it's easy to get fearful about the things that you love without understanding. So I think conversations are important, but I also think trying to articulate what a society could look like where it isn't, about where we don't have the embedded power structures that we currently have.
Well, that actually kind of leads to some of the things I was thinking about too. Our book club just recently read an incredible book that I think everyone should read. It's called The Sum of Us by Heather McGee. And she, just like Lindsey, just like you mentioned, she talks quite a lot about this sort of like zero-sum idea of the way our society is structured, right? Like only 6 people get to be successful and everyone else is not, right? And she also, the text basically goes into a history of how racism hurts everyone in a society, not just the people who have been marginalized by it, that there really are like long-term, long-lasting effects on the entire society. And she talks in the introduction about history, and I think that history, and the whole text really is just kind of a history text. It goes through, basically since the founding of the country to now, different instances of racism. And I think that history becomes really powerful when you make it a narrative, right? Because, as you're talking about, like, facts are really tough these days as like something to sell someone on. But if you tell a story, I think we can come together around stories in a way that doesn't feel quite as threatening, or doesn't necessarily have to feel as partisan. And I can't help but think that like books are a great way to do that. And whether they're fiction or nonfiction, I feel like books can paint like portraits of complicated people, and they can make you complicit in feeling complicated. Like some of my other favorite banned books are Lolita and In Cold Blood. Like, I guess I like an unreliable narrator a little bit, but I think that Beloved does the same thing, where you see slavery, at least when I read it, and I feel like depending upon the age you're reading it, you see the experience of these people who've lived through this horrific thing in such a visceral way that the story doesn't become about facts, it becomes about people suffering. And I think that is a way to sort of hopefully bring people together, and I might be naive and hopeful in that feeling, but yeah, I was hoping it would be okay if I read a little bit of Beloved, just a pretty short section. It's a conversation between Setha, who is a formerly enslaved woman who's now free in Ohio, and her daughter Denver. It's right toward the beginning, and they're just talking about their house, which is basically like haunted by the ghost of the baby that Setha murdered in order to save her from, or save them, I guess, from slavery. So, okay, so this is Denver first. For a baby, she throws a powerful spell, said Denver. No more powerful than the way I loved her, Setha answered, and there it was again, the welcoming cool of unchiseled headstones, the one she selected to lean against on tiptoe, her knees wide open as any grave. Pink as a fingernail it was, and sprinkled with glittering chips. 10 minutes, he said. You got 10 minutes. I'll do it for free. 10 minutes for 7 letters. With another 10, she could have gotten dearly, too. She had not thought to ask him, and it bothered her still that it might have been possible that for 20 minutes, a half hour, say, she could have had the whole thing, every word she heard the preacher say at the funeral, and all there was to say, surely, engraved on her baby's headstone, dearly beloved. But what she got, settled for, was the one word that mattered. She thought it would be enough, running among the headstones with the engraver, his young son looking on, the anger in his face so old, the appetite in it quite new. That should certainly be enough to answer one more preacher, one more abolitionist, and a town full of discuss. Counting on the stillness of her own soul, she had forgotten the other one, the soul of her baby girl, who would have thought that a little old baby could harbor so much rage. Running among the stones under the eyes of the engraver's son was not enough. Not only did she have to live out her years in a house palsied by the baby's fury at having its throat cut, but those 10 minutes she spent pressed up against dawn-colored stone studded with star chips, her knees wide open as the grave, were longer than life, more alive, more pulsating than the baby blood that soaked her fingers like oil. So.
I would just like to add to the point of the necessity of books being available to people my age, and especially within school settings. Within the past year, I've read over 20 different biographies and memoirs, and through them I've been able to understand a number of experiences which I had little to no context beforehand for. For example, the book A Long Way Home was suggested to me by my current Hmong teacher when I was interested in learning about what it was like to live as a Hmong immigrant and some of the background of that culture. Those books would not be available in my library if I were to live in certain school districts within Florida or Texas or other places. I have gotten all 22 books I read in this past year from my school library. Some of these include a memoir from one of the founders of the BLM movement, which is currently banned, Brave Face, which I talked about earlier, which is currently banned, All Boys Aren't Pink, another book about a queer African-American man when he was a teen, again banned. All of these have given me a lot of context, and some of the books as well have given me more understanding of myself as a queer kid who lives with mental illness such as depression and anxiety. The books I've been able to access within this school district have helped me learn, and I find that to be a very powerful tool and something that is being taken away right now in certain school districts, or at least hampered.
I wanted to give the forum speakers a chance to hear some questions maybe from folks that are here and online. So I'm going to take one of the microphones and y'all can share one if that's okay. And if you'd like to ask a question, you're welcome to raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you.
Thanks. Lindsey kind of suggested one of the issues, which is who decides. Ideally, the the educators, the teachers, and the librarians decide which books to put in their libraries, and then if there's a challenge, there's a procedure for that. And that's the way it's been, certainly that I'm aware of, in the Eau Claire School District. But what's happening is all kinds of people are deciding that they can decide what books people can read and what they can't. And that's a very interesting article in the Sunday New York Times Magazine this last Sunday. It's called Read Scare. It's about a town or city in Texas where all kinds of people, politicians, decide that these particular books need to be taken out of the library, or there are national lists that Lindsey was talking about, people who know nothing about books particularly, or who decided what books ought to be taken out of the libraries. And this is a very frightening article because what happens is teachers and librarians are fired because they don't go along with the banning which these lists and these politicians want them to do. So it's not good.
Just, it makes me question the process. When we have, school board meetings where people, because it is, I do believe it's not a numerical majority of people that are doing this. It does seem to be that whoever has the loudest voice and attending school board meetings and shouting people down. And I know locally, without divulging too much, but that there's a candidate that, if elected, has promised, or re-elected, has promised to investigate more about the books that teachers are peddling to students. And there were some not so subtle comments about that teachers were grooming students. So this language is definitely front and center. And it's a challenge as a teacher. It's a challenge as a teacher, period. But I think when you have this added layer of do you do what you came to do, which is to help kids to, push their thinking and maybe read a book that makes them question things, or do you play it safe? And it's also a challenge because you don't really know what play it safe means. I suspect I know what it means, but at the same time, sometimes the issues that are brought up in certain books, and especially if they're books by people of color or featuring LGBTQ plus authors or characters, that those seem to be the books that we're picking on. Nobody's coming to complain about Romeo and Juliet, even though the first, there's plenty of things that one could complain about. So it doesn't seem to be principled. And so that does make it hard, I guess. And I feel like I don't want to read that article because it, especially with the little union protection that we have as Wisconsin teachers, and in terms of mobilizing or supporting teachers, short of going to school board meetings just to, sort of proactively say, hey, we're just here because we appreciate that our teachers are challenging our kids and giving them books to read, and that's the way we want to keep it, to drown out those other voices. That's one strategy, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm curious to see how the election goes. Curious is not the right word at all, but that's the word I'm going to stick with. But, I guess, yeah, maybe we do need to start thinking about just organizing and showing up at those spaces too, to drown out those. I really do. I have to believe it is a numerical minority of voices that are caring that much about books they haven't read.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay.
I think to kind of go along with a lot of what you have all said is my sense that so much of our recent spate of challenges and attempts at book banning yes, come out of fear, but also maybe come out of the way our society has become much more performative. It is all about what you are doing in the TikTok video, what you post on Facebook. You want everyone to see what you are doing, and this is a way of being seen. And maybe people who have had power for a good long time, and now the eyes are on someone else, and oh, what happened? I don't feel as seen as I have before. And the idea of being able to share being seen hasn't really cycled around yet. But I too have a little glimpses of positivity. I read an article today about a library. I think it was a municipal library somewhere near Durango, where there were small minority of people who wanted to ban certain materials from the library, and the library board met and put the kibosh on it, and they put a ban on book banning. So there are little lights at the end of the tunnel.
Any responses from panelists? Okay. Any other questions?
I remember the controversy about the Judy Blume book. What was the name of it again?
The one I had mentioned was Then Again, Maybe I Won't. It's actually a male, it's from an adolescent boy's perspective.
Okay.
Yeah, and it just, I think I was thinking more about why that stuck with me. Not that you asked, but I've got the mic, so. No, but it did open my eyes to the fact, I think at that time as a girl, going through puberty, and there was so much about being a girl that felt stigmatized in those moments, and that book really focused on like what it was like for boys, and it was like, oh yeah, it's them too. We're not the only awkward ones, and and that was kind of an empowering part. But yes, just those realities of things that kids actually go through was, I think, controversial.
Wasn't there another one too that was controversial?
Well, many of her books, that Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret was another one, and that one focused more on the girls, going through puberty again, and just dealing with those things. So.
I wanted to ask Lopa about when you first read Satanic Verses. How were you introduced to it, and what I remember it was so exciting to see that in print. I remember just being scandalized as a Southerner. Satanic Verses, what? And so I'm just curious, and also just your perspective as a writer, to how it feels to just kind of be in this environment, if you have any thoughts.
As I said, the book arrived sometime in the early 90s when it was banned, but it was not confiscated by customs, and it came to me. And I did try reading it, but I didn't really understand it very well. And I was a college student at the time, but it was still very difficult for me. I think I had started reading Midnight's Children, but even that escaped my understanding. And Midnight's Children, I still have my copy that I bought, I think when just before I left Calcutta, so I was maybe just finishing high school at the time. So very ambitious in wanting to read these books, and I picked them up, but I didn't succeed. They stayed with me through college. I periodically dipped into them, but I didn't finish them. And I think ultimately I did finish them in graduate school, just because by that time I had read so many other books, and I had started understanding some of the strategies employed, and it became more accessible to me. And the second part of your question about how it affects me as a writer, I think, definitely there is this fear of offending. and that can be a self-censoring, mechanism that prevents you from being very creative. I don't think I will dwell in topics like Rushdie did, and be so bold as to take on things which are so directly controversial. But Rushdie, even his later books like The Moor's Last Sigh, he offended the Hindu fundamentalists. So even that was banned in some parts of India. And prior to that, Midnight's Children was banned because not because of religious grounds, but because he was commenting on Indira Gandhi as a kind of a power-hungry prime minister. So you never know where you can give offense. It can be religious sentiments being hurt, it can be political sentiments. So yeah, I mean, but I think I am a little safer because I write poetry and I'm not writing a novel. So, it's just my personal kind of lyrical meditations. I don't intend writing a novel, but I think as a literary critic too, there's a lot of danger right now because, if you're supporting or advocating for certain writers, then you can be in trouble. So definitely it affects me in what I teach and write. And as a teacher, at the university, you would think you're more protected and you don't have these routine challenges or people kind of bringing things to the board. But surprisingly, we have run into these issues. In children's literature, some of my colleagues have gotten requests that students didn't want to read Harry Potter because they thought it was, whatever, witchcraft or whatever else. And, some colleagues have given alternative assignments. Last year, we had a reading across curriculum at UW Stout, and we chose Alison Bechdel's Fun Home. And that is a book that has been banned a lot, and especially banned even at the college, not banned, but challenged at the college level. But we thought, it would be fine. We have a pretty visible LGBTQ community at Stout. We have Cube, and, we didn't anticipate it. But yes, indeed, there were students who said that, they didn't want to read it because it was offensive to them, and they went and complained to the chair of our department. And she, being a new chair, was following some of the older, ways, like asking the particular instructor to give an alternative assignment. And she was very, irritated by that. And then we had a meeting with UW Legal Counsel, and I was in that meeting. And the person from UW Systems said that there should not be this tendency to offer alternative assignments. Students should be told ahead of time what is in the syllabus. If they don't like it, they can choose another section. They can go to another instructor. But if they are in that particular section, they agree to what is in the reading list. And they may not agree with it, but they at least have to engage with it. So this was a clarification for us to know that we could enforce that. But they could still be a nuisance and create, make life difficult for the instructor.
Any other questions? Okay.
This is in response partly to what Lindsey and Lopa were talking about the reason for book banning being this kind of zero-sum mindset. And it occurs to me that it's a zero-sum mindset about civil rights, that book bans occur when minoritized groups seem to be getting more civil rights than they deserve. And that it's a way to intimidate and to check that kind of social progress. And I was trying to kind of link what Lopa was talking about satanic verses in India with this theory. And it wasn't until I heard you talking, Lopa, that it kind of clicked for me. I just wanted to see if that sounds right, which is, would you say that it was a fear of more civil rights for Muslim women that kind of inspired the book banning of satanic verses in India, which, you know, we could compare with transgender rights, right, in this country in the last several years, right, or post Michael Brown, post George Floyd, those racial justice movements, yeah. So I don't know if Lopa, you wanted to say anything more about that, or if that's accurate.
Yes, I do agree with you, David, about, you know, this push for more rights for Muslim women, which is more of a progressive kind of a grassroots movement, was feared by the more hardline fundamentalist part of the community, and that led to both the passage of the Muslim Women's Divorce and Maintenance Act, as well as the banning of satanic verses. These were gestures to show that, you know, the patriarchal, traditional Muslim, you know, rights would be protected. And it was done with the overt kind of sort of presentation that this is a way of protecting minority rights. But minority, who within the minority is it serving? It was serving the patriarchs, not the women who wanted some basic human rights. So here in this country, I mean, it is absolutely true that most banned books seem to be centered around LGBTQ issues. If you look at the number of books banned, and if you take account, most of them are those books. But there are others which, for instance, I think, is it Kenosha, where the Julie Otsuka's book, When the Emperor Was Divine, was kind of pulled away. It's still being debated. So that is a book about the Japanese internment experience. And the school board, I think, is still deciding, but it was pulled away temporarily because the overt explanation for that was, if you're going to provide the Japanese-American perspective, you need to provide the American perspective. You need to provide, Pearl Harbor, justification. Blah, blah. That's the story. So yes, I mean, it could be that now that we have more of a multicultural, multi-ethnic curriculum, there is a fear that somehow the patriotic American position is being diluted, and therefore we need to hear more of that. But it's just, I mean, some of these books should be judged on their literary merit and their beauty, and just how powerful they are. And When the Emperor Was Divine should just be, required reading for everyone.
We want to thank our panelists and give them a warm round of applause. You're welcome to talk with them afterwards. Thank you so much.